Hi, I'm actually holding the first author proof of my upcoming book in June. If you've not heard of it, it's CX First, Customer Experience Led Business Transformation. It's my first book, and it's going to cover a wealth of topics that I have learned during the 20 years being in the design and the transformation industry, going from customer experience imperative to what's the failure for CX, and then how does actually an organization that's focused on customer experience aligns itself to customer experience. So the cascade and then the operational engine that aligns towards the strategy as well. I'll talk about the systems thinking, service blueprint, customer journey as well into this, and of course the final but most important chapter is about how do you apply this in the AI age with the data and the predictive analytics that's getting even more prevalent in our times. But today's topic, let's talk about customer versus consumer. If there is any difference, or is actually they're all same. I've been during my research about the book, I've been hearing about or I've been reading about consumer experience as well as customer experience. So let's talk about that. So, in architecture school, as I studied architecture, we used to argue about falling water. It's one of the buildings. Frank Lloyd Wright built it, designed it, cantilevered over a waterfall in Pennsylvania on every top 10 list of greatest buildings ever made. Here's the part that doesn't make the postcard. The family who actually lived in it complained about leaks for decades. The chimney smoked, the roof dripped. They privately called it rising mildew. The client, the man who paid right to build it, was thrilled to own a masterpiece. The people who had to live inside it were a lot less thrilled with rain coming through the ceiling. And that gap, that small two-word gap between client and resident, between customer and consumer, is one of the most expensive blind spots in modern business. Today, I want to talk about why there is that gap. This is Human-Centered Experience. I'm Hitesh Bagai, and today's question is simple and a little annoying. What's the difference between a customer and a consumer? Most people will tell you that those words are basically interchangeable. Marketing decks use them as synonyms, executive presentations switch between them in the same paragraph. CX programs measure both and call it one thing. And that linguistic shortcut, that little move where we collapse two words into one concept, is, in my experience, one of the most underdiagnosed reasons CX strategies quietly underperform. Because the customer and the consumer, they're not the same person. Not in B2B, not in B2C, not in healthcare, not in education, and not in most enterprise software, and not, as Frank Lloyd Wright eventually figured out, in architecture either. So today I want to do three things. I want to define the difference cleanly. I want to show you why it matters more in 26 than it did 10 years ago. And I want to give you a framework you can run against your own CX program this week. So let's start with the definitions. The customer is the buyer, the person, the team, or the budget that decides what to acquire. They optimize for risk, for ROI, for procurement cycle time, for security, for a defensible decision. They can walk into a boardroom and explain the journey ends at signature. The consumer is the user, the person who actually lives inside the product after the contract is signed. They optimize for speed, for intuition, for low friction, for getting their job done before lunch. The journey begins at signature. Now, sometimes these two are the same person. A solo founder buying her own Notion subscription, a homeowner buying his own coffee maker. In those moments, the two collapse cleanly into one. But most of the time, they're not. Think about your last three enterprise software purchases at your company. Who signed off on them? The CIO, procurement, maybe a VP or something. And now think about who's actually using those tools every Tuesday morning. Different people, different criteria, different definitions of success. Here's the example everyone in tech knows. Microsoft Teams, more than 320 million active users globally. Slack, about 42 million. By that scoreboard, teams won. Now look at the second scoreboard. About two-thirds of the companies that pay for teams are also running Slack in parallel. Why? Because the people who were told to use Teams went and opened Slack anyway. Teams won the customer, Slack won the consumer. The CIO signed the contract, the engineer opened Slack. This is the buyer user divide. And once you start seeing it, you will see it everywhere. The parent buys the cereal, the kids eat it, the doctor writes the prescription, the insurer pays the claim, the patient swallows the pill, the architect designs the house, somebody else has to live with the leaks. Two journeys, two strategies, two definitions of success, and one CX program trying to serve them with one dashboard. So here's it where actually it gets interesting. This divide has always existed, but in 2026, it has more consequences than it did 10 years ago. Why? Two reasons. First, end user influence is rising fast. According to 6sense most recent buyer experience report, B2B buyers now spend about 60% of their journey doing independent research before they ever talk to a sales rep. That's up from where it used to be. They arrive informed, they arrive opinionated, and critically, the people doing that research aren't just procurement, they're developers, they're marketers, they're customer service reps. They are the people who will actually use the product. BCG has been writing about this for a few years in the context of cloud and infrastructure software. Developers have become de facto buying influencers. If your product doesn't pass the developer's gut check, it doesn't really matter how good your enterprise sales motion is. Second, and this one's almost a cliche at this point, but it's still true, the consumerization of B2B is real. Once people experience Spotify and Uber and Instagram at home, their tolerance for ugly, slow, confusing enterprise software collapsed. Adobe ran a recent study of more than 1,500 senior B2B leaders, and the finding was basically what every product team has been saying for a decade. The bar for acceptable inside a business application is now set by the consumer apps people use in their personal lives. So here's the translation. The consumer has more votes in the customer's decision than they have ever had before. Ignore the customer experience or consumer experience, and you don't lose half your audience, you lose the deal. That's a structural change, and most CX strategies haven't caught up to that. So here's the framework I want to give you. I call it the buyer-user divide. Picture a 2x2 matrix. On one axis, customer experience. How well are you serving the buyer, the procurement decision, the ROI conversation, the contract? On the other axis, consumer experience. How well are you serving the user, the daily reality, the friction, the joy or lack of joy in actually using the thing? That gives you 4 quadrants. Let me walk through them quickly because each one tells a different story. Top right corner, both high. I call these the aligned leaders. Customer experience is great. Consumer experience is great. The buying decision and the daily reality reinforce each other. Apple in modern enterprise, mature Salesforce implementations. These companies are rare. They're also the loyalty leaders. Top left, high consumer, low customer, beloved but unsold. The product is brilliant, end users love it, but the buying experience never makes it past IT security review or procurement. This is where a lot of great product-led growth strategies live and die. Early Slack in Fortune 500 environments was exactly this. Every open source tool engineers worship and CIOs reject is exactly this. Bottom right, high customer, low consumer, and this is the dangerous quadrant. I call it bought but resented. Procurement signs the deal, the platform deploys, and then nothing happens. Adoption flatlines, users open a shadow tool on the side, renewal becomes a fight. I've watched 7-figure enterprise contracts quietly die in this quadrant. Not because the buying decision was wrong on paper, but because nobody mapped what happened after Tuesday morning. And bottom left, failed value. Low on both axes, nobody wanted it, nobody used it, self-explanatory, don't ship here. Here's the question this framework is designed to provoke. Which quadrant has your CX program actually been optimizing for? And this is the harder one. Which quadrant have you been calling success? Because if your KPIs are close rates and deal velocity, and you've never measured what happens 90 days after onboard, you might be living in the bottom right quadrant and not know it. So here's the reframe. Customer experience and consumer experience aren't synonyms. They're not even competitors. They're two layers of the same system, and the thing that makes a CX strategy actually work is something most companies don't build. This is what I call the bridge. But before that, actually these two layers can be even more convoluted and more complex and have multiple layers within when it comes to healthcare or pharma, where actually the doctor who's actually prescribing the medicine to the patient, there is actually in between a nurse or a health practitioner who's applying a syringe or an injection to deliver that dosage to the patient who's eventually going to live with the consequences of this medicine, of this formulation. So before making it too much complex, let's go back to, I call it the bridge. And the bridge is what connects the buying decision to the daily reality. It's not a tool, it's not a platform, it's an organizational design choice. What does a bridge look like in practice? It's shared metrics that tie buying outcomes to using outcomes. Measuring renewal not just by ARR, but by user adoption depth. It's closed loop feedback that takes what the consumer is telling you on Tuesday morning and feeds it into the customer's renewal conversation in Q4. It's cross-functional ownership, so sales doesn't sell what product can't deliver. And it's including end users, not just buyers, in pilots, in demos, in advisory groups, in the actual buying process. Without the bridge, your customer and your consumer are optimizing for two different versions of success. And your CX strategy is incoherent by default. So here's what I would ask you to do this week. Look at your last 3 CX investments. For each one, ask yourself, which audience was this actually designed to satisfy? The customer or the consumer? And then ask the harder question, whose absence is the silence in your data? If the answer makes you uncomfortable, you're closer to real strategy than you were yesterday. This is one of the ideas I'm exploring in more depth in my upcoming book, CX First, Customer Experience-Led Business Transformation, and I'll post more information in the link below. Or you can also go to www.hiteshbagai.com. This is coming in first week of June, so watch out for it. Thank you. Thanks for listening to my podcast. If you found this insightful, please subscribe, share, and check out my recent article on this topic on LinkedIn. As always, feel free to get in touch with me with comments, suggestions, and ideas. I'm Hitesh, and I'll see you next time.